A before sunrise. 3 vehicles crept down the gravel like they had a permit to own the morning. Headlights slid across porch posts, garden beds, the path to the dock. Every detail that made the property feel protected and personal. Then the doors started slamming. One after another, too many to count at first, like a drumline made of intimidation. A line of men assembled in the driveway in matching shirts, shoulders squared, faces flat with practiced certainty. At the front stood Gerald Pike, heavy-set and confident, gripping a megaphone and a stack of HOA papers, as if paper could substitute for authority. In the doorway, Evan Cole didn't step forward or retreat. He held his ground inside the frame of his own home, letting the entire street witness the moment pressure turned into a spectacle. Far behind the trees, a police SUV sat down the road, present but distant, waiting to see who would blink first. Evan's name mattered less than what he built. After 11 years in the Marine Corps, he had learned the value of structure, written proof, and calm decisions under stress. When he finally came home for good, he didn't chase luxury. He chased quiet. He purchased a lakefront parcel in a community that sold itself on peace and order, then raised a craftsman-style home with his own hands. A workshop stood behind the house. A vegetable garden ran beside the porch, and a dock stretched into the water where the light went gold in the evenings. The HOA looked harmless at first, almost cheerful in its obsession with uniformity. Newsletters, community reminders, smiling board photos, a constant emphasis on standards. The first warnings were small enough to laugh at. Paint tone nitpicks tool, noise complaints timed to the minute, and a bizarre note about height of tomato supports. Evan handled each one the same way. Documentation, covenant references, polite replies, copies saved twice. He assumed it was ordinary bureaucracy. He didn't realize it was reconnaissance, measuring how easily he could be pushed. The first real blow arrived as a thick violations packet, stacked like evidence and formatted to feel final. 17 infractions. Some were absurdly specific, some were clearly invented, and several cited amendments Evan had never been notified about. The most aggressive items carried money. Fees designed not to correct behavior but to trigger panic. The kind that made people pay simply to make the threat disappear. Evan spent the evening at his kitchen table, covenants open beside the packet, marking contradictions and highlighting language that didn't exist anywhere in the governing documents. A pattern began to emerge. The HOA wasn't enforcing rules, it was manufacturing leverage. The next morning he verified the most serious claim with the county. A zoning reclassification the HOA cited as already approved. It wasn't approved. It wasn't even complete. The county had sent a request for additional documentation months earlier, meaning the HOA's notice wasn't just aggressive. It was premature by design, written as if facts were optional and fear was the point. Evan responded with a meticulous rebuttal, pages of citations, covenant language, county correspondence, and a clean timeline that made the HOA's narrative collapse under its own weight. He sent it certified, tracked, and scanned to the cloud. The kind of redundancy learned by people who've watched paperwork disappear when it becomes inconvenient. The HOA didn't answer with a meeting or a correction. It answered with speed. A formal notice of intent to file a lien appeared, professionally worded and strategically timed, attaching a $40,000 threat to the property like a collar. The letter didn't ask questions. It demanded compliance. A lien would choke refinancing, poison any future sale, and hover over the home like a warning sign aimed at banks and buyers. Evan hired a real estate attorney who reviewed the documents and asked about the one thing Evan didn't have in his file: the original property survey. That missing piece landed like a loaded question. If the HOA was bluffing, it would fold under scrutiny. If it wasn't bluffing, it meant someone had studied the land more closely than the HOA ever admitted. At the county recorder's office, Evan requested the oldest survey on file, the one recorded when the land was parceled, decades before the HOA even existed. The map was yellowed at the edges, stamped and archived, and it carried the kind of clarity that changes everything. Along the eastern boundary ran a documented public easement, a narrow corridor granting lake access that had been in place for 60 years. It wasn't rumor or interpretation. It was recorded history. In one stroke, the HOA's behavior snapped into focus. The HOA didn't need Evan's property to reach the lake. It needed to control the lake access story. Blocking a public route and replacing it with a private fee-driven entry point would turn access into revenue and power into profit. The petty complaints now looked like rungs on a ladder, each one designed to push Evan closer to surrender. Evan copied the survey, secured it, and his attorney moved fast. A consumer protection complaint, a quiet title action to lock the boundaries and rights into legal permanence, and public records requests aimed like a floodlight into the HOA's private communications. The clock started ticking. The HOA would either retreat quietly or come in force. Force arrived before 7. 19 men in matching HOA shirts formed at the driveway's edge as if numbers alone could rewrite ownership. Gerald carried himself like a foreman overseeing removal. Megaphone ready. Papers stacked for show. Confidence built on the assumption that most people fold when outnumbered on their own porch. Evan didn't posture. He let the moment breathe long enough for curtains to shift and porches to fill with silhouettes. 3 houses down, Tessa Lane, always fully dressed in her dark pink jacket, even in mild weather, curly golden hair catching the early light, held up her phone and recorded steadily. Then Evan appeared in the doorway with calm control, the kind that doesn't rise from ego but from preparation. He revealed the survey, the easement, the unapproved zoning claim, and the legal actions already in motion. The effect rippled through the line behind Gerald. Uncertainty replacing unity. Hesitation replacing performance. Gerald's posture changed first. The megaphone lowered. The stack of papers suddenly looked lighter, less like authority, and more like a failed bluff caught in daylight. In that small shift, the power moved back where it belonged. Inside the doorway, behind the deed, anchored by the truth, the HOA never expected anyone to dig up. The retreat was slow and quiet, but it wasn't the end. The end arrived in documents, not noise. Weeks later, the county fulfilled the public records request, producing hundreds of pages of emails, meeting notes, and coordination details that read like a roadmap of intent. The HOA leadership discussed enforcement pressure as a tactic, not a last resort. Properties along a development corridor were treated like obstacles. Compliance letters were described as leverage. A private waterfront plan promised licensing fees that were never disclosed to residents and never authorized under the governing documents. Evan's attorney forwarded the paper trail to investigators, and the conflict stopped being neighborhood drama and became what it always was: a misuse of quasi-government power for personal gain. Resignations followed. First Gerald, then others close enough to the plan to feel the heat. The development agreement collapsed when the court confirmed the public easement, making the private access route legally unnecessary and politically indefensible. The lien evaporated. The violations were dismissed. The HOA's management company severed the relationship in writing, unwilling to inherit the liability of someone else's scheme. Months later, a court order confirmed Evan's clear title. No encumbrances, no contested claims, no manufactured debt. He returned to his dock at dusk and watched the water go dark. Not in triumph, but in steady relief. The kind earned by refusing to be moved. If an HOA tried to corner you with official-looking threats, would you know which single document could collapse their entire story? And what would you do with the truth once you found it? Share it in the comments.